And we're live. And we're live.
We're live.
JP Collins.
And this is Julie.
And this is Book of Hours podcast. We're calling this one Space.
Yes, we are.
And we got a cigar.
And we got a cigar because we're actually celebrating right now. We're really, really excited about the next phase of our life. And if we do get any commenters on this video, we may not be able to address your comments or respond to them because we are outside. As you can see, this is the playground here at Alamo Square Park.
Yeah.
Um,
In fact, here, let me turn this around for a second.
I'm going to put that there.
And you hold
Yes.
this.
And then I'm going to share this on some of our social media pages.
So if you'll notice, where we are is kind of interesting because this is these are the houses everybody comes to Alamo Square Park for. This is the park that's near our house.
Ladies.
They're called the Painted Ladies, and you may remember them from such TV shows as
Full House.
and the I don't know, some other shows too. Anyway,
So we grew up here in San Francisco. Basically, we are natives.
well, more or less. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm going to bring this back around and come back over here.
If you want to just talk, I'm just sharing the
Okay. So the Painted Ladies are what everybody comes here for.
smoking my celebratory
All right,
cigar.
all right. Anyway, so which is good. Here, I'll have some of that. So, yeah. So the Painted Ladies are, they've been featured in TV shows. Julie and I mean, I basically grew up as an adult here. I moved here when I was 22. Julie was born in the Bay Area, has lived in San Francisco off and on for the last 25 years. I have lived here for about 33 years myself, in different neighborhoods and different capacities. And, well, it's time to go.
Yeah. So basically, we well, why don't you tell them while I share? Because I'm sharing
Okay.
the
All right. So the
uh,
last couple of months, we've been pretty quiet out there. We've been doing a few things, a few videos here and there, but pretty much we've been really quiet compared to what we have been doing prior to, say, March. About March, we decided to, we got somebody on our Facebook feed said, hey, houses in Detroit are going for very cheap.
Really
and we're like,
cheap.
yeah, you go there first, and we'll
and then
see you.
we'll decide.
We'll decide.
Well, okay, so it has to be, we should clear that this person is a friend of ours.
Right.
We do know her. We
Yeah.
worked with her at the theater, and and she also helped us out tremendously at our wedding. It was amazing. Back in November, she was amazing. She's a good friend of ours, and
Yeah.
so it's not just some random person
Yeah, so
on
we were just
social
joking around
media
with
that
her,
we,
right. So we said, well, we started actually like going, well, maybe that's not a bad idea. And so we started looking at houses, and turns out that there were, pretty affordable places. So after our honeymoon in Stockholm, we booked a trip to Detroit in April. And we went there, and we've talked about Detroit a little bit, and we'll probably do another podcast just about Detroit because it was an insightful and traumatic
really
event.
traumatic.
Yeah. And I've
Yeah.
talked about a bus ride there that I'll never forget. We'll get into that another time.
Yeah.
Found a lot of places that were move-in ready were gone. And a lot of places that were being advertised as move-in ready and that were kind of expensive for what they were toxic waste dumps. So we moved on after about a week in Detroit, and came back home, and I immediately booked a trip to Pittsburgh. And Julie stayed at home, but she was basically looking at properties the whole time that I was out there. I started working with an agent, and we found a house.
Right. So we did everything through, FaceTime and Skype
Right.
and all that.
And we found a place that we were able to literally pay cash for. And it was very affordable. And we're talking, let's just say it's under $40,000.
Right.
We were able
So-
to pay, and it's move-in ready, and it's in a community that is just outside of Pittsburgh. Not far away by bus.
Right.
Actually, by like maybe 10-20 minutes
Up
outside
and
of bus.
coming.
It's called McKees Rocks.
Yeah. It's going to be
And it-
completely gentrified. Probably not to the level that San Francisco is gentrified.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
Yeah.
But
But we're not there to gentrify.
We're not there to gentrify.
We're there actually to plug into the community
Right.
and be part of it and promote more sustainable living, but through community rather than like forcing our ideals and our you know what we think is sustainable on other people.
Yeah.
Um,
So
so
we wanted to talk about, one of the reasons why we are leaving San Francisco after a lifetime of being here. We have a rent-controlled apartment. We live in the neighborhood, like the neighborhood to live in San Francisco. We live here. We
yeah,
live across the street from one of the most beautiful parks in the world.
right,
So there's a lot
and it's considered one of
of,
the hippest neighborhoods in the United States right now.
right. There's a lot of money here.
It
We
wasn't
are
always that way.
Yeah, we're definitely in a seat of power here in San Francisco. We're sort of like the West Coast version of DC. There's a
Hmm.
lot of politics that come out of San Francisco that do make their way into the federal system. Kamala Harris started out as the Attorney General
Yeah.
here in San Francisco, and then moved on to her seat as California state senator.
No, no. She was the
Or
state attorney.
State attorney.
Now she's a
Right.
U.S. senator.
Now she's a U.S. senator, and her trajectory was really fast.
Yeah.
So there's something out of San Francisco and out of California called Emerge California. I urge you to look it up, and they literally will say on their website that they are there to groom and foster women who want to be in positions of political power. And so that's what they're there for. It's called
Hmm.
Emerge California or Emerge San Francisco, and it comes out of Emerge
Right,
America.
and
So,
it's a very neoliberal based policy based organization that's pretty much women up in a very cynical way.
right.
And the woman who just won the mayorship here in San Francisco
Also comes out
of
of.
that. Yeah,
So she will be following in Kamala Harris's footsteps. So make sure that you keep your ear to the ground about London Breed. And so what we want to do is give a personal account as to why we are leaving San Francisco, all of the obvious reasons, and then all of the not so obvious
right.
reasons.
Yeah, and I also wanted to clarify. We did buy a place, and we want to say that we didn't. We live in a capitalist system, and we found that in order to survive, we have to kind of work within the context of capitalism. We are not supportive of that. However, we are not buying the house for investment purposes. We're not buying a house. We're not owning property to just own property. We're owning property within the capitalist system to protect ourselves
Right.
from the vulnerabilities of actually being a renter, especially in the most expensive city in the United States.
Right. So um, I think what I would like to do is have JP talk a little bit about what the relationship is between a landlord and a tenant,
Yeah, especially here in San Francisco.
based on some of the historical references you have
Sure.
about like the serfs
Sure.
versus
Yeah. Well,
the landowners.
the thing about in a capitalist society, renters or landlords, people who are owners and rent their space to people, they're basically stealing. So they're basically thieves. They're making money from the fact that they own property instead of actually working for it. I mean, they can say that they work for it, but they really don't.
Right.
They're using their wealth and their property as a means of making money from other people. That relationship is often a well serf serf lord. I mean, they're called landlords, for God's sake, right?
Right.
So it's a serfdom. It's slave master relationship, and so. These are people that own property and make money from the people who depend on that space to live.
Right.
Now, the only thing worse than private landlords are the state, in the form of public housing, where there's absolutely no autonomy for the people who live there. There's no choice on where they live. There's no choice in how it's taken care of,
Right.
or what it looks like, or how they live in that space. And so
It's a
what we
controlled living situation. I have had people who are not, indigents. They have no criminal record, and yet because of them being a single white male without property here in this country, and not being able to find work. On top of that, they have had to go through sort of the welfare system and the Section 8 system in order to just have a place to live.
Hmm.
And so one of the things that he was telling me was that, you know, in order to do this for about 2 years, he had very, very affordable rent in a not so great neighborhood. He had to share accommodations like kitchens and bathrooms, but he had his own room, and he was paying a very, very small amount of money so that the money that he did make, he could actually save to go find an apartment on his own.
Best scarf I've ever tried on.
This is our backyard, and it's overrun with tourists, by the way.
Yeah.
So,
So another route to
yeah.
get away.
I mean, you can't go anywhere in the city anymore without dealing with tourists. It's incredible. But anyway, so he went through this system in order to give himself a leg up, in order to get to the point where he could actually have his own apartment someday. But he was telling me that it was such a controlled environment. He could not stay out past 10 p.m. He couldn't drink. He couldn't smoke. He had to, you know, and everybody in this system is, you know, coming off of drugs, or they've had, you know, arrests, or they're in the system somehow for some reason. Whereas he wasn't in the system. He just was poor for a
Right.
little while.
Right.
And it's incredible the way the United States treats people who are, you know, if you're unable to get work, and you're unable to pay your rent, and you have no other choice but to apply for welfare or apply for Section 8 housing, it's incredible how we criminalize the poor here. So I will let JP continue with that sort of dysfunctional relationship
Right.
that you do have
Well,
with your landlord.
What we find too is that with state owned property that rents to tenants, is that the tenants have no autonomy whatsoever. They have no incentive to keep up the place, and so you have buildings that are set up or created, built, a built environment that doesn't even meet the needs of the way that the people use them. They meet the needs of the architect and the way they want to design it, and how they think poor people want to live.
Right.
But not only that, but there's no upkeep. So a building that's built that could last 100, maybe 200 years, maybe 150, only lasts for 50 years and is
Right.
torn down after that period of time because it's so derelict after that point that they can't, really reasonably keep it up and
Right.
say.
And they
this is
always
gonna-
tear it down
Yeah.
and rebuild so that they can bring in.
Right. So what's been happening in Chicago with the public housing projects there, they tore those down and then they brought in high-end housing. So it hasn't happened as much here because a lot of the public housing has been sort of on the periphery anyway, but it will happen. I'm sure it will.
So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, you know, which I've been talking about this entire week, and I've been receiving a lot of, let me just once again share this on the Twitter page.
Okay.
I've been receiving a little bit of abuse online as a result of my open discussion about how we are so emotionally manipulated in society. And I noticed that in San Francisco, the renters here, you know, especially the friends that we have that have been renting for the last 25 or 30 years, they have something called rent control, which is something that we have as well. So we live in an apartment that is very beautiful and perfect for the two of us. It has unique things about it, like arched ceilings or arched doorways.
Yeah.
And
we're
it's
near this
got-
wonderful park.
And we're across the street from one of the best parks in the world, actually. And we have rent control. So people on the outset, you know, from the very front of this might go, why the heck would you ever give that up? You know, well, it's because we can see what's around the corner, and because we don't have an emotional investment in the place. We have an emotional investment in each other and in our goals in life, and that supersedes our emotional investment in this beautiful apartment, in this beautiful city, in this rent-controlled environment, which we're very lucky, you know, to have. But one thing I've noticed about especially San Franciscans who have rented for a long time here and they enjoy rent control like we do, is their emotions tend to cloud their economic judgment. Their emotions tend to cloud their future, and it actually ends up sabotaging their future. They have a relationship with the landlord, and they don't get anything out of it. So I have a friend who's been paying rent controlled rent on a very beautiful apartment in a lovely neighborhood, just as lovely as ours. But she doesn't own her property, and she's been paying a ton of money. Not a lot, not as much as she could, as the landlord could get for that unit. But she's
Because
been
of rent
paying
control,
a
yeah.
lot, but because of rent control. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, you've lived here for 25, 30 years, and the amount of money that you have put towards renting something you could have owned a year ago, 2 years ago, a decade ago.
Well, okay, let's
you
let's
know?
put some perspective on that. Now, you know, she's sort of in a situation of golden handcuffs, and we are as well. In that, you know, you have an apartment that's got controlled rent. It does go up every year, you know, a small
A little
percentage
bit.
every year,
Mm-hmm.
but it isn't at market rate, which would be impossible for us to afford if it was. And so people don't leave these places, and they stay in them for very long periods of time, to the point to where if something does happen, say the landlord sells the place, or they, you know, something happens with the market, whatever it might be, they convert the apartments into condos, for instance. That's been happening a lot, and they get what's known as Ellis Acted, which is a California state law that allows people to, you know,
Evict
evict
the tenants because
in order
they're
to
turning it into
yeah,
home
like
ownership.
a condo or something, right? So then they basically have to leave San Francisco because they cannot afford to find a new apartment for the same kind of rent. And so what happens is a lot of people are still operating, and we've talked about this before, still operating, have in a paradigm of, you know, 20, 25, 30 years ago, where we're acting as if things are still the same as they were back then,
Right.
when they're clearly not. And we're all experiencing this all around the world, especially in the United States, and
It's a
especially in
global
a seat of
epidemic.
power like San Francisco,
Right.
where neoliberal austerity type policies are forcing poor people out of places that they have built community for their entire lifetime, and they can no longer maintain that because they can't afford to live here, or, you know, whatever the case may be.
Right.
And so by staying in one place, you're actually hurting yourself, which is kind of weird, and it shouldn't be that way, because
Right.
before that, San Francisco used to be a very affordable place. It was a working class city until, you know, the 80s, when the Reagan administration came in.
Right. So, at the risk of sounding like, to, demonstrate in this scenario and using ourselves as an example, is how easy it is to go into that victim place, how easy it is to go into that victim mentality,
Yeah.
which is what Americans often do.
Hmm.
If it's not the Democrats or the liberals out there trying to save some sort of victim that they have built up in their mind, then it's the Republicans trying to blame the victim for their own victimization.
Right.
So victim blaming and also self-victim blaming is a big thing, especially when it comes to renters who have been pushed out. Every single data or Wi-Fi?
We're on Wi-Fi. I mean,
Oh.
we're on data.
Okay, because we're getting the spinning wheel.
Yeah.
So hopefully this is still
It's still rolling. It's
still
just
rolling.
that, yeah, we got a little interruption there. It looks like we have a couple of people have joined us, and a one like. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for
thank
joining
you for
us.
that. So we're just out here talking, just chatting. So the thing is what JP and I really want to do is to demonstrate how, despite the fact that it might look like we are being victimized into taking this this leap all the way across the country and buying an affordable house and moving out of our beautiful area and all this stuff, like we have to give up so much. The fact is we're not giving up anything. We're not so much as running away from this victim space, which everybody wants to put us in, but we're running, give us more autonomy and really live a life that reflects our ideology.
Right.
So,
And
Jay-
go ahead. Go ahead.
so JP's been out of work for a couple of years, and it was one of those things where we had to sit down and actually take a good hard look at what we wanted. And so the thing, sorry about the noise. The things that we decided on was, do we want to stay in this beautiful place and live this beautiful life? And because we could make it work, despite the fact that, he's no longer in the corporate sector and I'm not either. So our income has changed a little bit. We could still make it work. We have a rent-controlled apartment. We know where to go to find the most affordable places to shop and things like that. We could totally make it work. We really could if we wanted to. The thing is we don't want to. We
We-
want
you're right.
ownership.
we could, well, ownership over our destiny.
And
Yeah,
and as
so
much
autonomy.
as you, and also property too, because as you know, what's happening in this country and globally is something very, very, there's a shift and a compression going on that a lot of people and a lot of Americans aren't talking about.
Right.
And for instance, here in the United States, we've lost $21 trillion. That money has been taken out of our treasury by various factions in the establishment, whether
In the
it's
government, in the
the
state.
government, whether it's the Department of Defense, whether it's Housing and Urban Development. But this is $21 trillion, which amounts to $65,000 per American citizen. So when it is discovered, and these IG reports that are coming out that are, everybody's hopeful that all the right people are going to go to jail. They're not, sorry.
Yeah. Hillary is never going to go to
Hillary
prison.
is never going to go to prison, I'm sorry to say. The fact that, we do have these reports coming out, this all centers around the elephant in the room, which is that $21 trillion has been looted out of our treasury. And when the time comes to have to pay that money back, do you think that Goldman Sachs, and do you think that the Clinton Global Initiative, and do you think that the various people and the Department of Defense and Housing and Urban Development and all of these agencies which looted the money, do you think that they will be held accountable and that they will have to pay it back? No,
Not on your
it's
life.
going to come out of the tax dollar of the American citizen, which is going to put an ungodly amount of pressure on the finances of all of us. And so we basically, we have our finger to the wind of the global and the economy, the country's economy, and we also have our finger to the wind of the economy here in San Francisco.
So, so essentially we could, like Julie said, we could stay
We
here.
could totally stay.
But
could
we would
totally
basically
do
be
it.
working to stay in San Francisco. We'd be working more
Just-
than one job, which
Right.
a lot of people do.
A lot of people
But
do it. A lot. We have a
we'd-
lot of friends who work 2 or 3 jobs so that they can
so
pay their rent.
so they can stay here in this place.
Mhm.
What we would prefer to do is have more autonomy over our lives, do more things like what we're doing here, talking to you, more creative things like what we're planning to do, and work less in order to make that happen.
I'm making sure that this is actually podcasting because the circling.
Yeah, we have a little like a
been
spinner
going
going
on
on. But
for a
although
while,
that was
so-
going on the whole time we were interviewing Shahid, so I think it'll be okay.
Okay.
So Julie's going to look at that while I talk to you some more. So basically we could continue working to stay here, but at that point your quality of life goes down a great deal as
Right.
a result. And what we're trying to do is improve our quality of life. And
Right.
what we're trying to do is find a community that we can plug into, where the culture is going to be more in line with what we're looking to do,
Mhm.
where we can have a vegetable garden, where we can be part of a community and support it while they support us.
Mhm.
Not support us, financially, but
No.
support each
Yeah.
other, right? So a lot of the things that Debbie Lusignan and
Claudia.
have been talking about is supporting each other. Some of the things that we've been talking about here, and getting into like social ecology, like what Murray Bookchin was talking about.
What was
These are the things that
name
we're trying to accomplish, rather than working hard in order to live in a place that makes us work hard to live there.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. It's very frustrating to me to hear people talk about, the fact that they're so lucky that they have, affordable rent here. And then I always ask, but you don't own it. So it's great that you have, 2 or 3 jobs that give you an opportunity to live this fabulous life in San Francisco. But what do you show for it? I'll just put out a number. If you pay $1,800 a month for your rent-controlled apartment, which the minute you leave, your landlord will be able to get $4,500 for it, maybe $5,500 for it. What have you got? What have you gotten back from the landlord? Have they given you any kind of ownership? Have they allowed you to even buy out the property? I
Right.
mean, and
Rent
it's
to own,
rent to
anything like
own,
that? Yeah.
anything. So renting at one point, in our economy was a transitional phase of a person's life. You know, you grow up, you live in your parents' house, then you go away to college and you stay in the dorms, or you get shared housing with, you know, with your college mates. Then you move into an apartment when you get your first job. You know, maybe you're in your 20s. Maybe if you're a little bit of a late bloomer like I was, you're in your early 30s, and you live in an apartment for a while and you save your money. No more war. Exactly. We're going to get to that in 1 second. But you save your money and then you move into your home that you own. And usually when people go into home ownership, they get on a mortgage. Well, again, JP and I, paying attention to the past, you know, using the 2008 example as a way, as something to absolutely avoid, we said we don't want to pay rent, and we also don't want to pay the bank for our dwelling. We don't want to lose our property. We want to pay for it with cash outright. So if you've got cash outright, then you should do that. You should find a place and make it your own, even if it's a small piece of land that you can slowly build on,
Right.
which I had family members do back in the 50s and 60s here in California, back when land was affordable. That's what they did. They lived in a small apartment in the city, and they're not city people. I'm a city person. They're not city people at all. But they bought some land up in the mountains, and every weekend they would take the supplies and they would go build their own place on the property. So, and now that property is worth a lot. But,
Yeah.
you know, I don't have contact with these people. They're all very horrible, narcissistic people that have no empathy and compassion. So, and I don't associate with people like that. So don't think that I'm going to see any of the benefit of
proceeds
that,
from the
the
benefit,
proceeds
yeah.
from their,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So the fact is renting was really a way to get you to transition you into adulthood, so that you could start adulting and own your own place and raise a family and all that stuff.
And you know, and I want to also come back and reiterate that, you know, we are not promoting ownership and property ownership for the sake of property ownership, for the sake of capitalism. We are
No.
promoting home ownership
For the sake of autonomy,
for the sake of autonomy.
having power over your own life.
Right.
You know.
And so so along those same lines, I mean, San Francisco is almost a test case for what's going on. Remember earlier I mentioned something about a paradigm shift that's been going on. People are still operating in the United States, and especially here in San Francisco, as if it's 20, 30 years ago, right?
Right.
And so thinking about the way the politics work, thinking the way society works, thinking about the way things have been going on for, you know, decades and generations, they're now shifting, and everything's becoming a lot more austere. Things are more expensive, things are more difficult to exist in a place where you have set up community, where you have a place where your family used to be. San Francisco in the last 40 years has been nothing but people who have come here, gone to school, maybe set up shop for a short time, and then moved on.
Right.
There's a number of people who have stayed here, like us and like our friends that we were talking about. But for the most part, this place is a transitional place. It's almost like, you know, the city of Atlanta is a place where people start their careers and move on. San Francisco has become that. It never was that before. It was a
Right.
place of culture. It was a place of not establishment, but
Right.
at least of a place where you could call it home, and it was a solid place where people could work and live and have a life.
You could at one point, you know, and in any city in America, not just San Francisco, but in any city in this country, at one point you could be a school teacher and still afford like a small home. You know, maybe you could have a 1 or 2 person income, and you could do that. Well, that's no longer the case. We
Yeah.
don't live in a democratic society. So I'm going to read this comment. I sure hope this works out for you guys. I left Manhattan in '89 for New Orleans, only to have Katrina
Yeah.
blow up. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
I hope it does too. We live outside of a floodplain, so we're happy for that.
Right.
It's a community that in the past has been thrown under the bus, but is now on an upswing.
yeah, it is. There's a beautiful art center a few blocks from where, you know, from our house. We live behind a
a bakery that supplies the city with
the entire city
yeah,
with
Italian
all of
baked
the
bread.
baked goods.
Yeah, baked goods and things like that.
And also the art house movie
Oh, the
theater.
movie theater, right,
Yeah, that
yeah.
has they brew their own beer.
So there's a
in
little
the-
bit of gentrification
Yeah.
going on, but at the same time, it still
There's-
feels like, you know, it's still a little bit like Shameless, the neighborhood featured in Shameless.
Right. So
um,
a little blue collar.
So we did a little research,
Which is
on
fine
it for
with
sure.
us,
Yeah. In
you
fact,
know?
you know, like we said, we went to Detroit, where we were willing to be more or less, you know, what I like to crooms, people who set up the situation to where, you know, an economy can start growing from.
But
Yeah.
that wasn't for us. You know,
Yeah, it
sometimes
didn't
you
work
have to
out.
pay attention to the science.
So
you know,
the other thing too is we were able to afford to do this, not just because we have money, but
not just because we have money lying
but
around.
I actually had to do something that's actually going to cost us dearly in order to make it happen, and that is that I basically blew up my IRA, which neither of us really advise you to do. However, in these times, we think that we consider it to be the best thing to do, because we feel that with the economic crisis that is looming in the next year or two, maybe 3, that money is going to go away anyway. So we
Right.
might as well use it for our own advantage. We're going to have to pay penalties and a lot of taxes in order
But
to make
we
this happen.
made allowances for that.
We did.
We've
So we
been-
took out enough money to cover the cost of the house, and then
and the penalties.
and the
So
penalties.
putting it
yeah.
right back into the government's
Yeah,
hands.
which is
So
bullshit, but it's what we
that's
have to
part-
do.
So you have to work within the system that is
We don't agree with that system,
You
but
know,
we're finding that we have to.
that is sort of
work with it.
hemorrhaging you.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
somehow you have to exist in a. I don't, you know, and I really encourage people to find something that you can call your own and make your own, because we are on the precipice of a financial crisis to the likes of we've never seen.
And that's the result of what Julie was talking about a few minutes ago.
The looting of the treasury, $21 trillion is missing. A lot of it went to these constant interventionist wars. And the person who commented earlier that said no more war, well,
You're absolutely correct.
you're absolutely right, but unfortunately, this is the world we live in. I don't see in the foreseeable future, I don't see the Department of Defense or the Department of Homeland Security, which again operates outside of the Constitution. It is a temporary agency that was installed that should have gone away by now, but unfortunately, it's been amped up and more money has been put into the DHS. And ICE is a form of DHS, so ICE is also illegal. So anyway, the point is they're not going anywhere, and they're going to amp up this fear-mongering rhetoric to continue to other brown people in society and make, you know, even our own in this country the enemies of the state. So this is going to only get worse, unfortunately, and then it's going to collapse. It may not collapse in our lifetime, and then we can rebuild. So unfortunately, you know, but I do want to go back to that $21 trillion. We have 5-star generals from the Pentagon. We have economics professors out of universities saying we must stop the wars. Our future generations cannot financially handle
Support
it.
this anymore,
We
yeah.
can't support this anymore. $21 trillion has been looted from our treasury in order to finance those wars. So we're not talking tree-hugging hippies that smell like patchouli dancing around in their whatever going, no more war. No, we're talking 5-star generals who have seen war, and they've seen the financial catastrophe as a result of these interventionist war, coming forward and looking at reports, crunching numbers, and saying, this is not sustainable. Our country cannot sustain this. We can't keep this up. So if you have children, I hope you like them, because they will never be able to afford to live on their own.
Right. We feel like we were we were the first generation, basically. We were of the first generation that haven't been doing better than their parents. I did for a
Right.
short time. For a very short, very brief time, maybe a few years, I was actually doing way better than my parents ever did. The fact that we were able to go out and do what we're doing, it's requiring us a lot of sacrifice, but we're actually able to do something now. Even my parents had to sacrifice in order to attain, you know, their American dream, as it were, which is, you know, bullshit anyway. But they were able to do that through a great deal of sacrifice. But they were the last generation they were of the last generation, I think, that really was able to attain that. Now there are, you know, exceptions. There's people out there that in our age group and younger that are able to do these things, but they are the exception to the rule, not the rule itself.
Right,
Most of
exactly.
us exist at the behest of the 1%.
Right. Let me read this comment. The ecological print of the military in the U.S. is undeniable.
undeniably huge. Yes.
Right. So
And we agree with that. It's
Yeah,
not
so-
only environmentally, not only environmentally, but also economically and socially as well. So the fact that we've been in Afghanistan for 17, 18 years, and the reason being for a number of things, but I would say the
Yeah.
production of poppies and heroin, opiates,
Right.
and the fact that the correlation between that production of amped up production of opioids and opiates in Afghanistan and the opioid crisis here in the United States
it's very symbiotic.
is you cannot ignore it. The correlation you cannot ignore.
Right.
So
Of course not,
yeah.
So what we are sort of explaining is that this major life change in our personal life, which is to leave our home, because this is our home, leave it and go to a place that is completely foreign to us in order to maintain a sense of autonomy, and also to make sure that when the financial crisis does hit again, that we have our feet firmly planted on the ground. That, I feel bad because as well as the global crisis and this global shift that everybody is experiencing, and as well as the country experiencing a global shift and a compression financially, in San Francisco itself is also going to see, even outside of those two other shifts, San Francisco is seeing a shift, and it's going to see an even worse shift now that we have this mayor installed. She, instead of going and doing public appearances to the people and to the renters
during the whole election period.
during her election, which was weird to begin with,
yeah.
because our mayor actually died under mysterious circumstances, so we had to have a special election to install a new one. And so in order for that to happen, she should have, like all of the other candidates did, gone out to public spaces, coffee shops, town hall meetings, talking to the public, telling them, that if they were installed as mayor, these are the things that they would do. They would make sure that rent control was maintained. They would stop giving kickbacks to Twitter and the tech industry that's booming here in San Francisco.
And taking away the culture.
Taking away the
You
culture.
want to talk about ecology and cultural ecology as well. Social ecology has been taken away and is shifting over to more the wealthy and a homogenized
Right.
type of thing.
So-
So your favorite dive bar is gone now.
Right, and it's more than just that, though.
Right,
I
yeah.
mean, there's
That's just a
community
symptom.
centers where people could go and be creative, and something could come out of that
All the artists
creativity.
have had to leave San Francisco.
You
We're
know?
going to be part of that.
Right. So, but
Getting
again,
back to what you were saying.
But again, that statement right there by him, I don't mean to criticize
Right,
you,
but it
is
is
come from the victim place.
Victim place, yeah.
And this, we could stay. We could make it work. But the point is that we want we want to
Kinda
pay.
tried to photobomb us, but
Right.
it's on the wrong side.
Yeah.
Dumbass.
Got to photobomb us on the right side, dude, if you really want to photobomb us. But the point is that new mayor, instead of going out to town halls and speaking to the peeps, and instead of speaking to her constituents, she was hanging out with Chelsea Handler.
Who?
She was hanging out with the Hollywood set.
She was hanging out with the landlords.
She
and
was
the-
hanging out with the landlords who
realtors.
want to do away with rent control. And they were giving her tons of money for their campaign, especially one slumlord in particular here in San Francisco, Bonnie Spindler. She was hanging out with
Who
the
actually lives in our
moneyed
neighborhood, but
the
yeah.
moneyed interests who have a goal set in mind to get rid of rent control
And get rid of poor people.
and get rid of, but not just poor people, but just people in general who are the working class,
or
people
even just the
who
people
build
in between.
family
middle class.
communities,
Yeah.
to disappear the homeless people. Who knows where the homeless people go? That kind of thing. And some very sketchy human rights abuses taking place right under our nose. And these are the kind of people that our current mayor, who's just installed, these are the kind of people that she was hanging out with. She had scheduled appointments or scheduled meetings to meet with constituents, to meet with the regular people, us lowly, renters, and she just wouldn't show up.
Yeah, she would.
She pulled a Hillary. She was basically acting very like above it all, being very Hillary Clinton about it, going to where the money is, running in leaps and bounds towards the money. This is dangerous. This tells us if we have our ear to the ground economically and we pay attention to what's going on all around us, not just in the country or the state or even the globe, but right here in our little city, we have to pay attention to these kinds of things,
Right.
you know?
And the other thing that was very disingenuous about her was the whole way she ran her campaign. It was taking
Yeah.
the place. She was taking the role of a victim. She grew up in this district. She's the district supervisor for the area that we live in. But she was using so she was using a very cynical identity politics.
Yeah.
Well, a very cynical use of identity politics to get herself elected. So she was not only playing on the race card, but she was playing the homegirl card, and then at the same time she was saying things like she had been kicked out as the mayor, the interim mayor after the mayor died. She said she
wasn't
was kicked
kicked
out. She
out.
wasn't kicked out. She
She
engineered.
removed her. She
removed-
engineered her own removal.
Exactly, so that she could run for
right,
mayor.
right,
because
you can't run if you're an interim mayor.
yeah,
So the interim mayor that ended up sliding in and taking that space while she was running her candidacy
was a white dude.
was a white dude, and she's black. But that's the point is that she banks on identity politics, just like Kamala Harris
But
does.
using it a very cynical way.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
cynically, and it's very dangerous. What I'm seeing happening to San Francisco, and it's going to be a major shift for the renters here, is dangerous. Like it's to the point now where it's like he and I really had to sit down and have that. Excuse me, with low power mode, so I'm going to press that button.
Okay.
So he and I really had to have a heart-to-heart conversation about
our future and what we
our
were going to do.
future and what we really wanted to do. As much as we want to continue,
Continue living here. She's getting out of battery because we're on low power mode.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we discovered just as we were in the process of closing this deal to purchase this property in Pennsylvania.
I'm gonna go run.
Yeah, okay, she'll be right back. Is that we discovered that Jerry Brown signed into law. We talked about this before about how water is. Oh, don't touch that. Don't touch that. Okay, I'll hold it. You.
No, all I have to do is
Don't touch here. Don't touch here. That's the power switch.
Oh, okay. Sorry, everybody. Yeah.
We almost lost you. So basically, every Californian basically in about 4 years is going to have to. They're going to be required to only use what
Sorry
was it?
about that.
50, 60 gallons of water a day, something like that. Some austere amount of water
Right. It's
every
called
day.
SB 606. So,
Yeah.
American military are the world's greatest consumers of oil and the third major, right? So
Right.
these are great statistics.
And the thing is this is another use of using people who are concerned about the environment and concerned about things and using the cover of the need for conservation, which we support, by the way, but turning it around and blaming people for using too much water instead of, and we've talked about this before, instead of creating systems and infrastructure that allows that allows for conservation at a much larger level than putting it on the consumer, putting it on the citizen, and
So-
blaming people for being
for something
people.
that someone else has done.
Right.
So
And
it's
blaming
not,
people for being people.
right. It's not our fault that California is having a water crisis. But it is our fault for not, when SB 606 was passed in the Senate, it is our fault for
Allowing
allowing it to happen.
But
When
at
when
the
they
same
went through
time-
this test balloon a couple of years ago where they said, okay, everybody needs to stop, using water. And we were like, oh, okay.
We'll do
And
that.
instead of pushing back and saying, well, why? Why don't you get Nestle to stop taking all of our reserves, all of our water reservoirs for profit?
Right.
Why don't you do that first, and then I'll stop taking,
Right. Or
15-minute showers or
improving
whatever
the
the fuck,
improving the
you know?
way that they deliver water throughout the state.
Right.
And the
using
weird
gray water
laws.
to flush your toilets
Making laws,
and all that
yeah,
stuff.
passing laws in cities that allow you to use gray water systems. And not only that, but like here in San Francisco, there's been a housing shortage and a crisis, so-called. And instead of building houses that everybody can afford, they're building luxury condos and buildings. And none of those buildings are required to have gray water
Or
systems
solar, so, you know,
or anything
nothing
that
like
is
that that's
conservation minded.
ecological or
Yeah.
conservationist. So what we're dealing with, as far because this, we're calling this space not because of the whole space thing that Trump
Yeah.
was talking about. That's
Yeah.
just what you know what that is. Just as a side note, you know, putting the military in space, that is rhetoric in order to justify that $21 trillion that's
Right.
gone missing already.
Mm-hmm. It's because, you know,
See
we
what
have
I'm
to
saying?
protect the world from, you know,
From
space
whatever.
invaders. I
So
don't know. Yeah.
the point is, we're calling this space because we wanted to talk about the autonomy of space, how important it is to have your own space, something that you own that no one can take away from you
Or something that you at least control.
and that you control. And then when you have something that no, even when the crisis does hit again, when the financial crisis does hit again, and it will, is that you are on solid ground, that you are in a place that you own, that you don't, that the bank doesn't own, but you own it outright, and you don't have to pay a landlord who is going to break every law in the book to get you the fuck out of there so that they can make bank off of your
Yeah,
apartment
exactly.
that you've just been hemorrhaging your own bank account in order to give to a landlord, and you've got nothing to show for it. You've
Right.
got no ownership, you've got no autonomy, you've got no rights. So I think that you know, we wanted to do this because our personal journey to this point has been one of you know,
Well,
it's-
discovery.
is one of great discovery.
Yeah.
And the minute we start to go into that mode of victim mode, like, oh, you know, we both are out of the corporate sector anymore, so we can't afford to live here. It's not that at all. We could. My income and his income, if he decided to, you know, go work a couple of jobs, we both could continue to
Yeah.
maintain a life here. We really could. We
But
worked
again,
it out, but
yeah.
we don't want to.
But again, it would be working to work. It would be
Yes.
working to live here.
It would be working to just live here, and all the money that we do make, it would go to the landlord, and we wouldn't see any value to our work.
Mhm.
Like, what's the point of working if you don't have a future to show for it?
Right. Or
know?
if you know, again, you don't have any autonomy, you don't have any control over how that money is spent or where it goes to, and basically do what you need to do to be a human. And we're both creative people, and we'd end up doing things that were against that.
Right.
And you know,
and it
we
would
both
suck the life out of us.
absolutely
you
we
know?
both did say, okay, we're willing to sacrifice our creative life to make a living so that we can save some money, and then
We
we
tried.
can
We
tried
did.
that. And
Yeah.
and to tell you the truth, this is a place where that cannot happen, not anymore. I mean, it used to be a place where bohemians and
Although we
artists
could
and
make it happen. And
well,
that's
yeah,
the
but again, we
point,
wouldn't be
is
living
that
the life that we want to live, and we
would
wouldn't
be
have
working.
the autonomy.
We would be working just to say things like, yes, we live in the most beautiful city in the world, and yes, we're across the street from one of the most famous parks, and yes, we have beautiful blue skies and all this great stuff, and you know, just so that we could say that. But what value does that bring us when the financial crisis hits again,
Right.
and then the San Francisco financial crisis hits on top of that? What value is that for us if we don't have anything to show for it? I guess that's the point, is that we could do it. And I don't want to talk about being victims to a system that is forcing us out.
Right.
We're choosing to leave because we want something different. We want something better. I have friends who are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who still have roommates.
Right.
Isn't that pathetic?
So they're
and
still
they're
living.
working 2 or 3 jobs, and
And-
they're like 60.
Right.
Really?
And,
you
they're
have roommates?
So they're still living that same paradigm that we were talking about. And
Yeah,
it's
grow up.
ridiculous. Now, to somebody's point, just there about U.S. Military causing so much environmental havoc, and you're absolutely correct. There's a place here in San Francisco that used to be a Navy shipyard, and they're planning to start building out in the naval shipyard. And the sad thing is it's been sitting vacant for years and years and years because it's always been requested of the military to clean it up because there's actually nuclear waste out there. There's lots of shit
Yeah,
out there
so
that
they
we don't
wanna
even know.
build.
And now they want to start building out there without
people that
cleaning
are-
it up.
yeah.
So whoever ends up living out there is going to end up living on toxic waste dumps. Yeah.
Here in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And there's another area of San Francisco called Treasure Island.
Mhm.
And I lived on Treasure Island for a little while. And it's also a toxic waste dump. It's fucking landfill.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
It's landfill, but it was a naval
but it's
base.
got beautiful scenes of the bay. It's got
Mhm.
it's a 10-minute drive across the bridge, and you can walk out your front door, walk a couple of blocks, and you can see the bay and the mountains and the views of San Francisco, downtown San Francisco. You're right there. So it's like,
Well, and
everybody ignores like the fact that it's a toxic waste
well,
dump.
and to speak to something else that was talked about, when they were talking about actually developing the area for livable space, there was a developer that was saying, look, what we can do? Our policies are trained in Israel. Yeah, our police are trained.
Right, our police are trained in Israeli-style tactics.
Yeah, so let me
yes,
finish
of
this
course.
point.
I
Let
mean,
me
that
finish-
is the point.
Yeah.
So again, this
Let me finish this point, and
podcast is more about our local decision here
Mhm.
to leave a seat of empire and leave a seat of power and
Mhm.
move to a place where we can put our feet more firmly on the ground, and how it's important that we get out of that victim mode. It's important that as Americans we stop talking in that victim mentality when we're trying to improve our lives.
Mhm.
So again, yes, we are aware of the larger, more systemic issues, that our police are abusive and they do use Israeli style tactics and all that stuff. We're totally aware of that. That might be for a separate
That's a
podcast.
separate podcast for sure.
For sure.
But getting back to the idea of blaming people for the environment that we live in, and that we're using too many resources and things like that, and how the state literally does, and that's, we're talking federal, state, and local government, ignoring those things, and again putting it on other people. So they're developing Treasure Island, that used to be a military base, and there was talk about shifting the street grid out there so that it faced a certain way, so that they could take advantage of oncoming offshore winds, as well as solar capacity, make it a completely sustainable and green neighborhood, and make it so that their power grid actually would be self-sustaining. And that got nixed.
That never
Why?
happened.
Because
San Francisco.
because America, right?
Right.
So we're going to blame people for using too much stuff, when and the reality is that it's the corporations and the military and the government that are basically using whatever they want to do, doing whatever they want to do, using whatever they want to use, and blaming us for the fact that there's too much packaging on products in the store.
Right. So, some of the ecological issues that we're dealing with and some of the environmental issues we're dealing with can be completely fixed if we just started with, where it begins. If it begins with the packaging of your food,
Right.
if it could just start there. So
Right.
I have,
I live in
paradise, and I'm not a victim. Green energy is the only, yes.
Same way for the coming
Yeah,
years,
good.
absolutely.
I'm glad to hear that.
And we're, once we get established in our new home, we are going to look at those kinds of things, like solar panels on the roof. But in the meantime, I think,
over
it's
time.
important to get to a place where we can
Right.
add to a community,
Right.
and push for sustainable types of energy creation rather than create it ourselves.
Right.
But we have to get there. We have to do this in baby steps, and we all have to do that as people, and all start forming our communities that we've been talking about in baby steps. It's not going to be a major leap. You
Right.
can never start that 1,000-mile journey with a big giant leap.
Right.
It's always the first step, to use that cliche.
I think that, the system is going to fail. The system is going to fall in on itself. Eventually, empires always fall. And I think what a lot of people are wishing is that it would fall from the top down. And so I think I'm going to try to explain this, but I think what's going to happen is you're going to see it in communities first. Communities that are corrupted, small communities like San Francisco, where there's a
If you really
seed.
want to get a cool picture of something, there's the mother hawk right there and her chick right below.
Oh, very nice. Thank you. Yeah, cool.
Hawks are so pretty.
This is the third year they've been here.
Nice.
Awesome.
That's great.
Thank you.
This is by the way, this park is the home of a lot of wildlife.
Hawks.
And we get a lot of birds migrating, including hawks.
Right.
And those are probably red-shouldered hawks up there that the man was just talking about. So yeah.
Red-shouldered hawks, just as a side note, are really popular in San Francisco, and there are a lot of little boutique dogs, little purebred boutique dogs in San Francisco, and the hawks like to come down, and they think the dogs are like gophers or rats or something, and they
The
try
red-tailed hawks, which are bigger, than they do migrate, are the ones that are like,
Right. Yeah. So we've
So-
had neighbors who've come running back into the apartment building with their dog clutched to them, going, "Oh my God, a hawk just tried to eat my puppy." So it's pretty funny.
We also have very big ravens here, and they also kind of like check out the little dogs.
So, but empires always fall, and eventually, what's going to happen is that you're going to see it falling. You know, a seed
Crumbling
of
from below.
crumbling from below, and then because you have to understand that the corruption in San Francisco and other cities hold up the corruption at the top. You know, it's because of the various organizations and nonprofits that are out there, like Emerge California or Emerge America, which groom unscrupulous women to become powerful leaders in the government. So once we can, once we see that these,
While using idpol to get there.
right, exactly, identity politics, once we can flush out identity politics, I think we've all woken up to the point that identity politics isn't really real. It's really just about money and economy, keeping us very poor, very uninformed, very emotionally manipulated. And identity politics is a way to distract us from what's really going on. So you'll see little seats of empire falling and imploding, and eventually, it's you're on a house, and your house isn't going to fall from the top. It's your foundation.
Right.
Once your foundation starts to crumble, then the whole thing is going to come down,
Right.
and that's a process that may not happen in our lifetime, but we're beginning the citizen podcasting.
We're starting to see what's going on. Yeah.
Right, and just all of us who are sort of waking up to the fact that we really don't have a left-right paradigm as far as our non-functioning democracy in this country. They're all in one big pot, the Democrats and the Republicans, and they all have the same goal, and that goal is to make sure that they and their backers maintain an obscene amount of wealth on the backs of those that work, the backs of the workers, and on the backs of
The citizens.
and the rest of us. So when that fall comes, and when empire does fall, the citizens get crushed. And what we're doing is we're recognizing that that's going to happen, and we are moving to a place where we won't get crushed.
Well, at least trying. I mean, what we're going to be dealing with in the next few years is the only tool that we'll have available to us is the equivalent of a duck and cover drill in a nuclear fallout, nuclear explosion. So so we're doing our best in trying to protect ourselves, and it may not actually work. But like our viewer who commented about New Orleans, the equivalent, the economic or social equivalent might happen as well.
I can't quite read what that's
Good
saying.
luck with your move.
Oh,
False
thank
flag
you.
and war coming. Money. We didn't get it all, but thank you.
Yes,
Um,
you're correct. I mean, false flags are all around us all the time.
Mhm.
But one thing we do know for sure, one thing that is not a false flag, and one thing that is absolutely true, is that $21 trillion has been looted out of our treasury. And in order to put that money back into the treasury, they will be looting things like your savings account, like your paycheck, like your IRA account, like your retirement. They will be looting you. They will be taxing the hell out of you. So they will be raising your rent. There will be more corruption and more false flags in order to distract you from the fact that they're going to take all your money.
yeah.
So it's really, important to stay awake. And all of our few followers that we have are very awake. We've learned a lot from you, which is why we do what we do. So
Well, it's coming up on an hour, and we actually are, despite all the
Despite all this,
gloom,
this is
gloom and
our-
doom,
I-
we're actually going to go out and have dinner and celebrate.
yeah, we're celebrating because we closed on the house, and we have it. It's ours. We don't the bank doesn't own it. Landlords don't own it. It's ours. It's ours alone to do with what we want. And we're very excited about moving into a community that we can actually be of some serious use.
My best estimate is $50 trillion.
Wow. Yeah. You know what? You could very well be right. So I recently tweeted. I urge other podcasters to really look into Mark Skidmore. He is the
He's a
economics
professor? Yeah.
professor. He's the economics professor
At U of
out of
M.
the University of Michigan. Lee Camp, who is who has a show on the RT network, has referred to Mark Skidmore as someone who did all of the serious investigations to show that we are actually in a major crisis here financially. And there was another gentleman that actually interviewed Professor Skidmore personally. So I got to hear Professor Skidmore speak out of his own mouth,
Yeah,
as
so
opposed
look him
to
up on YouTube. Yeah.
hearing it third party. So look him up. Mark Skidmore, University of Michigan economics professor.
Mhm.
And so it's really important. Get your feet on some firm soil and some firm ground before
Mhm.
this thing hits us.
As I told some people once on a Facebook page that I belong to, it's like build your community up, learn how to grow food, and do your best to stay low underneath the radar.
Right. Yeah. So
Fly low and avoid the radar, as they like to say.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
We-
we literally mean that now.
Yeah.
You know.
yeah.
And so what's happening in Flint and Detroit and what's going on a higher level here in San Francisco is going to be what's going to start happening to the rest of us.
I think that, because San Francisco is a seat of power and a lot of politicians come out of San Francisco and then they
Seat
move
of empire, too.
Seat of empire is
Yeah.
that, things may not be so obvious here. It's a destination city. So that's the fact that it's a heavily touristed destination city is a cover for the fact that it has some very unscrupulous and very corrupt things going on underneath. So it's really important that you pay attention and not be so moved by your emotions. All of the people that I've spoken to who have had to leave San Francisco because of the economy and whatever, they couldn't find work or whatever, they all come from a place of victimization, where they're that's what they lead with when they start the conversation.
Yeah. Oh, I
And
had to go to Oakland. Oh, I had to go to there.
Oh, poor me, I had to leave my beautiful apartment and go somewhere else. It's like, and we're not doing that. We really want to make it clear. We're not the victims here. We're avoiding being the victims. We're getting in front of it. And also, we want people to look to their community. So look to each other to help each other instead of going through the motions of like voting the person above you who's actually hurting you. The person above you is hurting you. And don't ever lead with your emotions. Lead with your intellect. I know it's in there somewhere. I know you have the ability to read policy. So there's a couple of our friends waving to us. So we're going to go ahead and end this now.
So I'm going to give you a view of what we're experiencing out here in the park.
Go say hi to Chuck.
Okay, and she's going to go say hi to our friend. So I'm going to end this by turning this around this way. And so there's the famous sisters. And you can see downtown. All right, well, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time. Have a great time this weekend, and again, protect yourselves, build your community, grow a garden. Thanks, bye-bye.